Hey everyone. Have you ever had a conversation at work or at your business and you heard somebody say something and you just kind of blink and you heard the words but you didn't quite understand the language they were speaking? It was almost like they were speaking from somewhere on a completely different planet. I heard one of these here recently. I heard a younger colleague talking to a more senior colleague about a project deadline. The more senior colleague had said something like, "Hey, we need to put in some extra hours this week just to get across the finish line." The younger colleague responded with, "I'm not really available after 5." So in this moment, I felt like there was this big wide open gap between two people. Like they were standing on opposite sides of a canyon, both yelling at each other about work ethic, and neither one of them could hear the other one very clearly. That's what this episode is about. Welcome to At the Kitchen Table. I'm Jason Klink, your host, and today we're pulling up a chair to the table to talk about something that's been simmering in break rooms and group chats and HR meetings for years, probably decades. The generational divide between work ethic or around work ethic, and specifically what happens when Generation Xers like me and the younger generation show up to the same job or the same business with completely different ideas about what working hard really means. So let's set the table here. And I want to be upfront. I'm coming at this as a Generation Xer. That's my lens. I grew up in a world where you showed up early, stayed late, didn't complain, and figured it out. That was the deal. You earned your stripes through sweat and silence. Nobody was asking about your work-life balance. That phase or phrase didn't even exist in most workplaces until pretty recently. And I know I'm not alone in this. I've had so many conversations with people about age, other Generation Xers, some older Millennials, and the frustration is real. They'll say things like, these younger workers don't pay their dues, or they want to have the title without putting in the time. I've said some version of it myself, if I'm being honest. But here's where I want to pump the brakes just a little bit, because I think we're confusing two very different things. There's a difference between someone who doesn't want to work and someone who doesn't want to work the way you did. And I think a lot of the tension comes from mixing those up. Think about it like this. My generation's relationship with work was shaped by a specific set of circumstances. Our parents, the baby boomers. They told us to get a good job and hold on to it. Loyalty to a company or a job meant something. You climbed the ladder, you didn't job hop, you didn't question the structure, you just performed. And then what happened? A lot of us watched our parents get laid off anyway. We saw the recession hit. We learned that loyalty doesn't always get rewarded. But instead of walking away from the grind, most of us leaned into it harder. We said, okay, if the system isn't going to take care of me, I'll outwork the system. That was our survival strategy. Now, the younger generations, the millennials and Gen Zs, they make up a majority of the workforce now. And they watched us, and they saw what it cost. They saw the burnout, the missed recitals, the stress, the health issues, and they made it a different calculation. They said, why would I sacrifice everything for a company that could let me go tomorrow? And honestly, that's not lazy. That's logical. Okay, so let's be real for a minute. Understanding where someone is coming from doesn't mean the friction goes away. Because when you are on a team together, the work still needs to get done. These different viewpoints crash into each other quite frequently. Let me give you some of the friction points I've experienced firsthand, and that I've heard from other Generation Xers over and over. The first one, the above and beyond gap. In my world, going above and beyond wasn't optional. It was expected. You didn't wait to be asked. If you saw something that needed doing, you did it, even if it wasn't in your job description, especially if it wasn't in your job description. That's how you got noticed. That's how you moved up. But I've noticed that younger workers tend to be much more boundaried about that. They'll say, that's not my role, or I wasn't hired for that. And from a Generation X perspective, that can feel like a lack of initiative. But from their perspective, they're setting healthy boundaries. They're protecting themselves from a scope from scope creep and exploitation. Both things can be true at the same time. I remember my time as a 911 dispatcher and dispatch supervisor, and when millennials first started entering the workforce. We would, my generation of worker would work until our legs fell off. We didn't care that our shift was over. If we were in the middle of something that meant something, we continued it until the end. When these millennials started to enter the workforce, when their shift was done, their shift was done. And we could have a queue lined up of phone calls that needed to be answered, but if it was time for this generation of workers to go, they would stand up, clock out, and leave the building. That was very, very difficult to understand. The second thing was communication styles. This one is huge. I'm used to a world where you picked up the phone or walked down the hall. You hash things out in real time, face to face. Younger workers often prefer a more simpler communication style. Slack messages, emails, shared documents. That's not avoidance for them. It's efficiency. But for someone like me, it can feel impersonal. It can feel like a lack of urgency. The third thing, the visibility of effort. This is kind of a sneaky one. My generation tends to equate a visibility with effort. If I can see you at your desk, if I know you're in the building, I assume you are working. Remote work threw a monkey wrench into this and into the entire framework. Younger workers are much more comfortable with output-based working. Judge me by what I produce, not where I sit or how long I sit there. And I get it, I do. But old habits are of perception, and they're very hard to break. Fourth thing, maybe the biggest one, is the relationship with authority and hierarchy. I grew up in workplaces where you respected the chain of command. You didn't question your boss. You earned the right to have an opinion through years of experience. Younger workers tend to come in expecting a seat at the table from day one. They want to be heard. They want to understand the why behind the decisions, not just the what. And I'll be honest, sometimes that feels disrespectful. But I've had to ask myself, is it actually disrespectful, or is it just different from what I'm used to? I've coached and mentored many younger firefighters, younger generation of firefighters, and even just recently, giving some mentorship and instruction to young firefighters usually comes back with why, or their version of reasoning of why they were doing it the way they were doing it before. It doesn't make it wrong, it just makes a difference, but a lot of times it comes across as disrespectful. So here's the question I keep circling back to. And it's the one I want to sit with at this kitchen table today. What if work ethic isn't just one thing? What if work ethic isn't about how many hours you put in, or whether you answer emails at 10 o'clock at night, or whether you volunteer for every single extra project? What if work ethic is really about doing quality work, meeting your commitments, and being someone people can rely on? Because if that's the definition, then a lot of younger workers have excellent work ethic. It just looks different from mine. I think what happens is we conflate work ethic with work culture. The culture I came up in rewarded suffering. I know that sounds a bit dramatic, but it's true. The more you sacrifice, the more you were valued. Staying late was a badge of honor. Taking a vacation was almost suspicious. And we internalized that. We made it part of our identity. So when a younger person says, I'm logging off at 5 because I have a life outside of this place, it doesn't just feel like they're a scheduling difference. It feels like an attack on our identity, on the thing we built our self-worth around, and that's uncomfortable to admit, but I think it's important. Because here's what I've also noticed. Some of the most productive people I've worked with in the recent years are younger workers who work fewer hours than I do. They come in, they're focused, they use their tools efficiently, they collaborate well, and they go home. And the output is there. The results are there. The work product is just as good, sometimes even better, because they're not burned out. They're not running on fumes and resentment. Meanwhile, I know plenty of people my age who are at their desk 12 hours a day, and half that time is spent in meetings that could have been handled by emails, or doing busy work that doesn't necessarily move the needle. But we feel productive because we're present. We're putting in the time, and I think we need to be honest about the difference between being busy and being effective. That doesn't mean there are legitimate concerns. There really are. I've worked with younger people who genuinely don't want to put in the effort, who want the reward without the work. That exists. But that's not a generational trait. That's a human trait. Every generation has had these people. We just didn't have social media amplifying it and turning it into a narrative about an entire age group. All right, so if we're going to share at the kitchen table, if we're going to work side by side and actually make it work, what does bridging this gap really look like? I think it starts with something simple but hard. Curiosity instead of judgment. When I see a younger colleague doing something differently, my first instinct used to be frustration. Now I try to take that and make it curiosity. Why are they doing it this way? What is the logic? What do they know that I might not? Because here's the truth. That might sting a little. Younger workers grew up with technology and tools that make certain tasks exponentially faster. Something that took me 3 hours in 2005 might take them 45 minutes today. So if they're done early and I'm still grinding, is that a work ethic gap or is that an efficiency gap? We have to be willing to tell the difference. At the same time, I think younger workers can meet us part of the way. Experience does matter. Pattern recognition matters. The ability to navigate difficult conversations, to manage through crisis, to understand organizational politics, that comes with time. And I think there's value in acknowledging that, even when the hierarchy feels outdated. The best teams I've been on recently are the ones where both sides have brought something to the table. The experienced workers brought institutional knowledge, steadiness, and context. The younger workers brought fresh thinking, technical fluency, and a willingness to challenge things that needed to be challenged. When both sides felt respected, the work was generally better. And I think as leaders, because a lot of us in Generation X are in leadership positions now, we have a responsibility to stop managing through the lens of what worked for us and start managing through the lens of what works, period. If the output is excellent, if the team is functioning, if the goals are being met, does it really matter if someone did it from their couch in sweatpants instead of at a desk in a button down? I'm learning that the answer is no, even when my gut tells me otherwise. So here's where I'll leave this today. I don't think this is a conversation that gets resolved. I think it's a conversation that gets continued. And that's kind of the point of this whole podcast. Sitting at the kitchen table with stuff that's messy and complicated and personal and just talking through it. If you're a Generation Xer like me who's frustrated with a younger generation of workers, I hear you. That frustration is real, but I challenge you to ask yourself whether you're frustrated because the work isn't getting done or because it's not getting done the way you would do it. Those are two very different problems. And if you're in that category of younger generation of worker who thinks your Generation X boss just doesn't get it, you're probably right. But give us a little grace. We're unlearning a lifetime of conditioning that told us our value was tied to how hard we worked and grounded ourselves down. That's not easy to let go of. We're working on it. Some of us, anyway. The work still has to get done. The output still matters. On that, I think that every generation agrees. How we get there, that's the conversation. And I think we're better off having it together than yelling across that canyon. Thanks for sitting today at the kitchen table, and until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have a great day.